With all the elaborate and totally abnormal happenings within the various storylines of Marvel and DC, it's basically guaranteed that taking some lines out of context is sure to make them sound utterly and completely bonkers. However, there are lines that stand out among others, both for still being totally weird in context and for being unforgettably, undeniably weird. A lot of this can be attributed to somewhat outdated language, as naturally the kind of things that are acceptable to say now and then differ massively. However, that's not exclusively the case, as there's also a vast portion of equally weird and wild stuff made within the worryingly recent past that's sure to raise a few eyebrows, or, in happier instances, force you to transcend consciousness and proclaim with equal wonderment, "Cool, I'm dead." So folks, you know the drill. I'm Ewan from What Culture, and here are 10 lines from comics too weird to be true. Number 10. Batman kills babies. Although it's not going to win any awards for most surprising comic book sentence, the concept of Mr. Miracle subtly trying to convince people that Batman is a child murderer in his free time in Tom King and Mitch Gerads' lauded comic is both vaguely disturbing and absolutely downright hilarious. It's something about the absolute seriousness that he delivers the line with that makes it so bizarrely funny. The statement is obviously untrue, depending on how you perceive the deaths of his sidekicks, Jason Todd, and it's also so honestly spoken that you almost believe Mr. Miracle genuinely thinks the Dark Knight has some equally dark secret hobbies. It is also unclear if he's talking to his friend, the tastefully named Funky Flashman, or his actual infant son, which would make the whole thing even funnier. Warning your infant son of life's dangers? Crucial. Weeding him off Batman at an early age? Perhaps less so. Number 9. Fool. Dr. Doom does as he pleases. Right, okay, so at a glance this line probably seems very on point for Victor Von Doom, but the actual truth is far more hilarious. No doubt many of you will have stumbled across the Dr. Doom toots as he pleases edit, and though that is funnier than the original line featured in an issue of Spidey Super Stories, the real thing, it ain't. Because these comics were aimed at a younger audience, the dialogue is pretty funny. Basically, Doom asks Namor to take him to his throne room, he obliges, and then this is what follows.
That shell, what is it?
The Sea Horn! Do not use it!
Toot! Fool, Dr. Doom does as he pleases.
Doom then promptly scurries off with his new instrument and claims to have taken over the world. Bless you, Victor. Bless you. Number 8. Kudos to cancer. If I'd tried carrying you 80 pounds ago, we wouldn't have gotten 2 feet. There are a few lines more obviously controversial than the phrase, kudos to cancer. This interesting awfulness is enhanced by the fact that this is said by our hero, Daredevil, to his currently cancer-stricken best pal, Foggy Nelson. Proving himself the ultimate best friend, Foggy avoids the natural reaction someone would have upon hearing this line, i.e. immediately removing that person from your life forever. Although it's a heroic trait to try and look on the bright side of life, trying to tell your best friend that their cancer had a positive benefit is maybe not the most tasteful move ever. At the very least, the fact it doesn't immediately equal a huge fight proves that Foggy has a secret superpower all of his own, being the chillest dude in existence. Number 7. The thing about these tights is that they're, tight. While comic pickup lines are universally questionable at best, hitting on someone by reminding them that their spandex battle uniform is skin tight is maybe the low-key creepiest possible way to do so. Especially when said person you're trying to woo is Booster Gold, who is both entirely oblivious and also notably not Batman. What makes this outright hilarious, however, is the timing, or rather, total lack of timing, as this masterclass in romance is being carried out halfway through fighting a giant murderous robot. Sure, the course of love never did run smooth and all that, but that doesn't mean you should ignore robot death lasers in order to try and woo Booster Gold. Number 6. Any of you who don't want to be crushed by a couple of tons of sexy, look out. Try and imagine any human, strange superpowers or not, saying this exact string of words. It's impossible. It sounds more like a line out of Shrek than anything from the pages of the X-Men. This tone isn't helped by the fact that the line is said by the Blob as he falls several stories out of a building. From a character who started life out as a superpowered circus side act, it's actually quite impressive that the life of Fred Dukes only gets weirder and weirder as time goes on. While there's no denying that the Blob himself is one thick beer, dramatic falls out of windows are usually reserved for the likes of James Bond and other action heroes. So, if nothing else, you can possibly forgive the line for seeing the Blob follow in these heroes' footsteps. Either way, I think we can all agree that it's a much better use of his time than fighting will.i.am in X-Men Origins Wolverine. Number 5. So, they laugh at my boner, will they? No, these weren't the fateful words that erupted from Netflix as Disney announced plans for a streaming service of their own, but instead a line uttered by everyone's favourite clown prince of crime, the Joker, in an early Batman comic from the 1940s. Okay, so this one depends more on the childishness of the reader than any strangeness on the part of the writers. That said, it is funny to realise how much some phrases that were written in old comics just wouldn't be said nowadays, especially given some scribes must have been creating double meanings on purpose. Although it's unlikely to scandalise folks the same way less savoury comics lines have, anyone who sees this particular panel out of context is sure to spend at least a couple good minutes wondering what exactly has led up to that line occurring. Number 4, open your own KFC right here on Okara. Finding a weird sentence in the blessing to this world that is the KFC Justice League crossover is like looking for a bloody Funko Pop figure at a quote-unquote comic book convention. Mercifully, the creative team appears to have made this comic with the explicit intention of making the single best comic line in existence, by having Earth's own Colonel Sanders make peace with the Orange Lanterns, by offering them a big boneless banquet. You can't help but imagine all the Green Lanterns who gave their lives over the years fighting their orange brethren would probably be more than a little bit miffed that all it took for a ceasefire was some fried chicken, but this is the world they now have to make peace with. Number 3, you and I are brothers. All you need to do is accept my kiss? Vampires routinely have some sketchy family dealings in and outside of comics. As such, it shouldn't be all that surprising that Zaris had an incest-esque moment halfway through X-Men Curse of the Mutants that would make even George R.R. Martin blush. Now, it's technically not as bad as it sounds. Zaris is actually just offering to turn Cyclops into a vampire, which is comparatively less weird, until you think too hard about him referring to tearing a chunk out of someone's neck to drink their blood as a quote-unquote kiss. And then it suddenly becomes much, much worse. As much as Cyclops' epic threatening speech in reply is badass, you can't help but wish he'd just called out how downright bizarre what Zaris had said was, then and there. I don't know. At least it wasn't as bad as that time Ms. Marvel became romantically involved with her own son. And now it's in my head. Number 2, if I wanted a human to touch me, I'd call Posh Spice. Where other lines tend to be more offensively strange, this stroke of writing genius is just pure distilled weirdness. While it makes sense that Skrulls have learnt Earth culture, the idea of them having extensive pop culture knowledge is the most bizarre fact to come out of a comic, maybe ever. More importantly, it implies that the Skrulls are at least fans of Posh Spice, which means not only do they know about girl bands, but they also really enjoy them. While the writers categorically did not mean to invent an alternate universe where their evil alien race are huge fans of the Spice Girls, it's also maybe the single best accident in comic book history. And number 1, Aqua Babies growing up, and like any kid, he loves rough stuff. You don't want him to be a sissy, do you? The life and death of Aqua Baby is one surrounded with comic controversy. It's almost a blessing that it is, because that's the only way that this fresh nightmare of a line has been collectively forgotten by the comic community. The worst part? It comes from our fish-based saviour, Aquaman. We ain't talking about hook-handed badass Aquaman either, but the fishy Super Friends dude from the early 70s. The weirdest part about this thing is that it doesn't really make any sense. If every kid loves quote-unquote rough stuff, that includes feminine kids too, and so, by Aquaman's own logic, he really doesn't need to be worried about his child. This aside, the fact that Aquaman is saying this line to defend throwing his son like a particularly sturdy football is maybe the most interesting and most concerning part of this whole spectacular train wreck.